Welcome to Math344, Mathematics of Sports. This is lecture 19. So the content today is going to be discussing, the new shift rules or what's possible now in baseball. But I wanted to talk a little bit about possible papers that we can write. So we have a couple of things that we've done enough now, I think, to do something interesting. So first, we've talked a little bit about trying to find the goat of all goats. This is an extremely difficult question. There's no way you're going to answer it. This is something designed to just have fights in a bar. And so hopefully you are in good enough shape that you can either defend your position or you are with people who are in good enough shape that they can defend your position. You can't answer goat of all goats, but boat of all boats, who has seen the most success? That's more manageable. But again, a lot of it is going to be a function of what do you define as success. A lot of it is also going to be a function of when do you play. In a lot of sports, if there happens to be two teams that you're pretty good around the same time, they're going to beat up on each other. Another project that we have was trying to figure out, in some sense, a slightly better version of on-base plus slugging. And the way I view a lot of these statistics is these are designed the same way a bartender learns how to make drinks, right? If you are working at a bar and you're busy and you have lots of orders coming in, you do not have plenty of time to measure out slightly different amounts of all the different things. You want to be able to make drinks quickly and get them out. So you have very nice integer ratios, 2 shots of this, 1 shot of that. And you have something that allows you to give shots quickly. So when you look at a lot of the old formulas in baseball and a lot of things in sports, they're just simple ratios of integers. They're easy to work with. If you look at things like the quarterback rating, things like that are much more involved, and you now have different weights. And the question becomes, what weights do you want to put on things? So we talked a lot about trying to find what is a good weight for singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. I think that would be an outstanding paper to write up all the stuff we've done. And I know there's a bunch of you who've already spent a lot of work on that. If you want to do that as a final project, I think that's terrific. And trying to figure out how much more valuable is a home run than a triple. Well, with a home run, everybody who is on base and the batter will score. With a triple, it's quite likely. And we talked about the run expectancy matrix and using this as a proxy to try to figure out on average. And again, you can, there's the phrase paralysis by analysis. If you try to include too many things, it's going to become far too involved. It's going to become unmanageable. How much do you want to take into account? When I'm trying to figure out the value of the single versus the double, triple, and home run, do I go to the point where I take into account who the opposing pitcher is? Do I take into account what the bullpen situation looks like for the other team? If I am playing a team that has a very weak pitcher, do you think a triple is worth more or less than playing against a team with a very strong pitcher? So you have a weak pitcher. Do you think a triple is worth more or less than against a strong pitcher? Okay, so good. So if it's a weak pitcher and you've got a runner on third, it's very likely you'll be able to score. If you have a strong, Pedro Martinez, say in his prime, on the mound, okay, there's a good chance he's going to be able to pitch around that. And so when you're trying to figure out how much is something worth, well, it's easiest if we just say, let's look on average what's going on. Whoops. Yep. All right. Thank you. Okay. So if you have a very strong pitcher, the value of the triple is going to be much higher. Do you want to include something like that? Definitely put a little note saying that this is assuming what's going on against an average. But right now in Major League Baseball, we don't do that for statistics. We don't separate people's batting statistics based on how are you doing against starting pitchers versus how are you doing against relief pitchers. Who do you think this might matter most for? Which kind of hitters? Yeah.
Well, some hitters aren't usually the starting lineup and we'll come in and pinch hit.
Good.
We'll play against relief.
That was exactly what I was thinking of. You might be late in the game and you might really need a run. And so you bring in someone to pinch hit. And of course, who does the other team bring in?
Their best reliever.
Their best reliever that they're capable of, or that they want to use at this time, or maybe some kind of handedness specialist. And so when you're trying to see, how well are these pinch hitters doing, and you're looking at their statistics, are they facing better pitches on average? Are they more likely to be in a situation where the lefty-righty matchup is not favoring them? A couple of years ago in the playoffs, the Brewers were playing the Dodgers, and the Brewers did an interesting trick. They listed somebody as their starting pitcher, and he threw to one batter, I believe, and then they took him out. And the reason they did this is they wanted the Dodgers to commit to their starting lineup and their handedness. And then they put in somebody with a different, handedness, and took advantage of the matchups. Now, you can decide whether or not you think stuff like this is fun and should be, allowed, or if come on, let's just have some honor. Who here has seen The Princess Bride? All right, so I put down my rock and you put down your sword and we try to kill each other like civilized people. I could kill you now. And so it's, what do you consider as essential to the game? What do you consider as, I really don't want the game to degenerate into something like this. So I think we have a really nice paper based on what we've already done in this class on the value of a single, double, triple home run. One of the biggest issues is going to be how much does a single versus a double advance base runners. Triple, we know exactly how much a triple advances base runners. Same thing for a home run. But for the single or the double, a lot of that is going to be a function of the batters in front of you. So if you have a very fast team, then your single is actually more valuable than if you're on a slow team, because the fast team can actually push a little bit further with all likelihood on that single. When you write a paper, you don't want it to become overwhelmed with all stuff like this. You have a bunch of remarks for future work. Here are some refinements you can do, but there's enough that we can already do with what we have, where we will assign some probability of a runner going from first to third or from second to home on a single. And then for the double, some probability of having a runner from first to score. And we can now have relative worth. And we actually looked at, in terms of slugging, what was it? 2 triples was 6, and a home run and a double was also 6, right? So those would be worth the same in terms of slugging. They would be worth the same in terms of batting average. How much better is the home run double versus 2 triples? Or of course, you could do a home run and 2 singles versus 3 doubles. Which would you rather have? Then, of course, the interesting thing becomes, your goal is to win baseball games. And so maybe hitting 3 doubles, it may not score as many runs, but it might score you more runs in key leverage situations. That it gives you, 3 times when you're getting a double versus only 1 time when you're getting a home run. So you might win 1 game by a lot because you got the home run. But maybe the 3 doubles, we don't want to get into all of this stuff. I think we already have enough for a really good paper on that. We have, I think, enough for a good paper on backgammon and doubling. And the idea here is we have different types of rules for what we're talking about for a game. Some of these models, when we're doing a random walk, it's allowing the game to be infinite. It's allowing you to have as many times as you want the same configuration, re-emerging. And I think we now have a good analysis of when do you double and when do you accept the double. We can, of course, look at what happens if you put in some restrictions. If you can only double once, we can look at some restrictions about if you have a certain number of points, then as the game progresses, you reach a point where you have huge swings in probability because there's not that many outcomes left. And so, depending on what model you choose, you're going to get a very different answer. The reason you can have different decisions in life is not everybody is going to evaluate a board positioning the same way. This is the greatest challenge in essentially everything we're doing, is coming up with what value do we assign a given configuration. So I know we've got, some, football fans and players in here. 4th down, go or no go?
I mean, you're becoming more likely to go for it than you used to be.
Good. So it's more likely. Do you always go on 4th down? No. As a rule of thumb, whenever you hear always, you should cringe. Because you could almost surely come up with a pathological situation where you would be a moron, to do this. But in a lot of situations, the expected value of going is better. Occasionally, it can be disastrous. One of my favorite examples, does anybody remember the Alabama-Auburn Iron Bowl game? So time expires in regulation, and it is a tie, and so it's supposed to go into overtime. But Alabama protests, and they check and they add 1 second to the clock, and Alabama decides to try to kick a 60-yard field goal. And so Auburn has to decide how to defend. And they go, look, the odds of getting a 60-yard field goal in college, we're not really that worried about that. So rather than having as many men as possible near the line of scrimmage, they kept some people back in case the kick was short. And they actually caught the kick, ran back for a touchdown, thanked Alabama nicely for adding that extra second to the clock, and won the game. And again, you're trying to figure out what is the value of the position. If you're the Alabama coach, and I'm going to be careful because I have a lot of friends who are Alabama fans, do you kick the 60-yard field goal? What are your other options? One is to just take a knee and go to overtime. When the Patriots won their first Super Bowl, you can listen to the announcers basically saying, I don't understand why the Patriots are going for it. It's 4th quarter, there's not much time left on the clock. They're deep in their own territory. They should just essentially take a knee, go to overtime, and play to win in overtime. A lot of people say that is not a bad strategy because God forbid the Patriots, have a turnover. It's a chip shot for the Rams. So you've got to be careful. So one option is just take a knee, don't kick. What's another option? Run a play and go for it. So you could try to go for the touchdown. You could do the Hail Mary. You could do laterals up the wazoo. You can do something like that. And you always have to balance this with, well, what could go wrong? What is the problem? Well, we could unfortunately turn the ball over. It's only problematic if the other team scores or we commit a penalty, which gives them an extra untimed play. So the real challenge in almost anything in sports is assessing the value of a configuration. So we've talked a little bit about chess. We can argue as to whether or not chess is a sport. It's definitely a game. One of the biggest questions is how do you evaluate the relative positioning on the board? And that's where different chess programs and different masters will give you different answers. Some people, if they really like their knights, then you might want to trade knights with them or whatnot because they are so effective with their knights. And there's a great line in the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer where someone goes, don't play the board, play the opponent. You have a different strategy based on who you're playing. And so it's not new. You need to incorporate, when you're doing stuff like this, not just what's on the field, but the mentality, the psychology of the people you're playing. So baseball has decided to have some new rule changes this year. Every now and then we get some rule changes. It'll be interesting to see how much this impacts the game, how much of it is really not that big of a deal. Anybody know any of the rule changes that are now in play? So there's the pitch clock, and there's already been several instances where people have not been set up in time and strikes have been called. And in fact, people have struck out because of this. Long term, I don't think this is really going to be that big of a deal. I think people are going to adjust very quickly. What else have they changed?
Bigger bases.
Bigger bases. The bases are now larger. This is allegedly to decrease injury. I've got to be careful because this is being recorded. I guess it's good to know that people are not going to just move where they are to have the action still happen in front of the base, that they're going to somehow be respectful of people. Now, they did change things about collisions with the catcher a couple of years ago to protect the catcher. That has made a significant change. It'll be interesting to see if the bigger bases cut down on injuries. What else will bigger bases lead to?
stolen bases.
More stolen bases is one, but what else? Yes.
More singles.
It might lead to, well, so I'm not sure if it leads to more singles. So the question is, when they changed the size of first base, is some of first base now closer than it was before? Did they do it like that? Or did they just push first base like that? So maybe so do the bases extend out just a little bit further? As opposed to, I'm not sure. Depending on how they do it, yes.
I was just gonna ask, in either case, wouldn't it be bad? Because like, if you say, isn't it one of the rules where like, if someone is like trying to steal towards second,
Right.
and they get caught, they could just run back, so wouldn't it be easier for them to get that?
So if the base is a little bit bigger, you have more of a place to try to dive in safely and get around tags. Yes. So a lot of this is going to try to increase offense by making it harder to get people out. Either, running to a base, running back to a base, stealing a base. The design is to increase offense. What are the rules in baseball? Yes.
Well, I know the third one is you could only pick off, I think it's twice.
Yeah, I think you have 2 pickoff attempts, maybe, and then on the
And then I
third
think-
one, right. And if you can, I think you can get them on the third pickoff attempt, but if the third pickoff attempt fails, they get a base. It would be interesting if the runner could decline the base. I don't know if you can, but it would be interesting where, and of course, if the runner is declining the base, do you then just give them the base? Because why are they declining? Well, if you have a runner on base, it often affects how pitchers are throwing the ball. People might be able to look at their signals. You have fielders who are trying to keep people on the base. But so again, a lot of these things are designed to increase offense. The last one, which is the one I really want to talk about today, is they have declared the shift illegal. And again, you can declare whatever you want, and people will find loopholes or ways to look at things. And the question is just how much can people get away with? How much can people change? What are you willing to accept? When do you then put in new rules? And if it takes a while to put in rules, you might be safe for a while. So now there's a rule that you have to have at least 2 fielders on the dirt or on the grass on each side of the field. I believe they are not allowed to be in motion when the ball is thrown. Because otherwise you could have, for instance, the third baseman and the second baseman playing, very close to the second base bag, with the shortstop running as the ball is being thrown, timing it just perfectly so that as the ball is thrown, the shortstop now crosses into the right field side of the infield. But I believe you're not allowed to be in motion in the infield now. But what some people have done is they have redeployed their outfielders. And so they have the same number of fielders on both sides, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And you can drag someone really close. And then they move the left fielder to basically be between first and second in shallow right field. And so you now have 3 outfielders, but you do not have anybody in left field. So this has been done a couple of times now. As a mathematician, I thought it was fascinating watching the evolution of the shift. At first, nobody shifted, or you might shift occasionally against one batter. And then teams started to shift, and it was almost like exponential growth. Seeing each year more and more teams shifting to more and more batters until it was extremely prevalent. And this led to a lot of people getting out, and it decreased offensive production. Now, again, this is a game or a job or whatever you want, a sport, whatever you want to call it. It's a product that's supposed to be entertaining. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. If you're a batter and they're shifting against you, what do you need to learn how to do? Hit the other way. If you can learn to hit the other way, they're not going to shift against you. Do you have to hit the other way as effectively as you hit the normal way? No, you have to do enough so that you keep them honest. If you play tennis, it's the same about how you position on the serve to protect, say, your backhand versus your forehand. You've got to have a good enough backhand that they're not going to completely exploit it. You have to decide just how far over am I going to go? So over here now, what is the danger of a pronounced shift like this? Yeah, if you hit the ball in left field, especially in some ballparks, you have a tremendous amount of room to run. It is a little bit better for the fielding team when you're doing something like this rather than the mirror image, because if you're going for third, you at least have the throw from left field to third as the center field is scurrying over, which would be much better than someone scurrying over to right field and having to throw to third. So the danger of a triple is not as bad in this configuration as if you had the shift the other way. So what I want to do for the rest of class today is talk about how would we handle this problem? How would we set up trying to decide, is this worth doing? Where do we put our extra outfielder? And if we're the hitting team, how do we defend against this? Or how do we take advantage of this? So again, the purpose of this is to talk about mathematical modeling. This is one of the skills I want you to get out of this. And then at the end of the day, if we really care about this, you then write some code, you gather some data. Okay? So how would you try to analyze how effective this is? So again, let's keep things simple. Let's assume that all baseball players are spheres and they can't adjust their hitting. As a mathematician, it's always useful to make people sphere. So you cannot change your hitting profile as the shift happens. So how would you determine where to put your players? What comes into play in making these decisions? So how to shift. So players hitting profile is independent of shift. Do you think that's a reasonable assumption? If not for all players, for a large number of players? Or do you think that there's some adjustment you can do?
Minor with a lot of players.
And so you might be able to hit a few more balls towards the left field side, but the cost of that might be having worse hits to the right field side, as you're trying to deal with the shift. So it might not be an unreasonable assumption to say, to first order, we will assume that you cannot adjust your hitting based on the shift. Yes.
A lot of it too could be dependent on like the situation of the game. Where if it's like ninth inning, you're down 2, so all you just need to just get on versus if you're down 1 and you're trying to pull it.
Right, right. And so you're absolutely, when you're trying to make decisions, the game state is going to be completely essential in terms of what's going on. There's a lot of times where, it's a tie game. I don't really care about walking you because there's a runner on second. If that runner on second scores, we lose. It's the bottom of the ninth. So I'm going to put you on, and I'm going to try to face, somebody that I think I have a better matchup against. Plus, this also gives me now force outs. So how would we try to decide where to put the fielders if the hitting profile doesn't change? So we'll assume infield is fixed. And again, when you have lots of moving parts, any kind of assumptions you can make to cut down the problem is great. Initially, we have how many fielders to worry about. I'll accept 2 answers. How many fielders do we have to worry about? 7, right? You really don't have much choice of where you put the pitcher. When they're pitching, their foot has to be on the rubber. You can adjust maybe slightly where they're going to be, but not much. The catcher, you really don't have that much choice where the catcher can set up slightly differently depending on certain types of pitches, but for the most part, the catcher is really fixed. So you have 7 fielders that you can move around. If we assume the infield is fixed, that gives us variables. So can vary the 3 outfielders. So how do we determine where we put the outfielders? I will give a, really bad approximation. And so we'll put, say true field is here, true field is here. We want to decide how to put down the outfielders. So what would we need to make an intelligent decision?
Like distribution of where the batter fits the ball.
Good. So the first thing we need is distribution of balls in play to the outfield. Why balls in play? Well, so this is where you could say, well, it depends maybe how much foul territory there is. And so is balls in play right? Do you want to take into account foul balls? Probably yes. What about home runs? So I see a yes and a no. You can defend both of them. Why yes?
I said no.
Oh, okay. Why no?
Because if the ball's hit out of the ballpark, it's going to be a home run regardless.
Okay, so if the ball,
where it stands it is, unless it's in this like 1 or 2 foot range.
and was that what you were thinking of, the 1 or 2 foot range?
Well, I mean, I was just saying if they can homer in left field, they can probably also hit a deep fly ball to left.
Right, but that's different than a home run.
Right.
Right.
They still like have the capacity.
Yes.
Even though-
Yeah, I think like if you're not gonna be able to hit a home run the other way, it's less enticing.
Right. I think the real issue is the deep into the stands versus 1 to 2 rows. So, 1 to 2 rows in, that might matter.
You also have to consider too, Alex, some like ballparks of different dimensions.
Yep.
So like there could be some home run, certain ballparks that take the stadium without other places.
Correct. So whatever we have is going to absolutely depend on the field. I don't think there's any sport that has as much variation in where you play as baseball. So, again, if you want to be simple, you could just say, if it's a home run, it's a home run. It's, again, how much detail do you want to get into? There are a lot of people who have home runs robbed from them, where you have a fielder make an incredible jumping catch, extending above, and when we're looking at statistics of batters and hitting profiles, that would mean we would have to open things up. And it's not enough to look at how many home runs does somebody have. We have to look at how many outs do they have and how many of these outs would have been a home run if there wasn't a fielder there. So when you're doing an analysis like this, yes, in principle, if I have my data marked up well enough for something like this, great. And that will be very valuable, and certain fielders will be worth a lot more if they're able to make those catches. But there is a huge danger of missing that if we just look at the batter profile. Are they getting outs or not? Well, are they getting an out because we happen to have a really good fielder who made the jump? If you want to talk about a play that makes a huge swing, converting a home run to an out is tremendous. It might end the inning. It definitely means no runs score. So this is not a minor event to ignore. So if we're trying to model something like this, we have to decide which data do we really need. And if you have a couple of home runs that would have been an out if you had a fielder who was able to make that jump, then not having that fielder available is extremely important. In a situation like this, if we're looking at the picture, it might not really be changing where the right fielder and the center fielder are playing that much. So if it's a home run on the right field side, it might not really matter. If you're in a ballpark like Fenway, where you have the green monster, it's not going to matter, in the left field, but in other ballparks, it will matter. So that's the thing we have to worry about. Okay, so one is distribution of balls in play. What else do we need to know? And again, while I care about the answer, for today, I really just care more about the thought process. Yes.
Well, I was gonna say the trajectory of the ball, like the launch angle, like the higher it is, the the longer it's in the air, the better chance the outfielders get to it.
Good. So maybe time of ball in flight. And depending on, if we look at the distribution of balls in play, if we're just looking at the physical place where it lands, that's one thing. But this is talking about not just where it lands, but how long it takes to get to where it lands. And that's going to make a huge difference. So when you're trying to figure out, will you have time as a fielder to get there? If a batter hits a lot of long fly balls, I might actually have enough time to run and get it. And so that will greatly influence where we decide to put our fielders. What might impact the time of flight? Anybody know what might impact the time of flight?
Could the type of ball that the pitcher throws impact?
Good. So pitcher can influence two. Different types of pitches are more likely to have pop-ups versus line drives. And so depending on who's pitching, you might actually have a different distribution of fielders. I'll be careful because this is recorded. My son is going to, I believe, be starting for JV today. So I will not be here this afternoon. He is not an overpowering pitcher. I love him like he was my own son. But if I want someone to blow the ball by someone, he's not who I want. But if I want somebody who has good control and can throw strikes and will not be rattled, even when umpires are walking testimonials to LensCrafters and other places like that, he's very good for something like that. He will stay calm and he'll throw strikes. What do you need if you have a pitcher who throws strikes? You need a defense. So if you have a good defense behind you, just get the ball in play. If you don't have a good defense behind you, then you want somebody who's going to blow the ball and go for the strikeout. So, a knuckleball pitcher, if the knuckleball doesn't quite break the right way, it's batting practice. And it doesn't really matter who you have in the outfield in a situation like this. So when you're trying to make decisions like this, when you're trying to solve a problem like this, what I really want you to think about is what really matters. And before you start doing your research, try to draw up all the things we need. What kind of data am I going to want to collect? When you're collecting data, it's often better to collect more data than you need, just in case you realize later, oh crap, I needed blank and I don't have it. I don't want to have to go all the way back to the beginning. Gather anything you think might be possibly relevant. All right, anything else we really need? So the pitcher can influence, yes.
I mean, we said distribution balls to outfield.
Yes.
Don't we care about where they're hitting ground balls and stuff too? Because in that shift that you showed before,
Yes.
almost to get another infielder. So it's like, is that worth it? Or are there ground balls more spread out between the two sides?
Okay, so these would be maybe ground balls that could go to the outfield.
Yeah, like.
And so, for instance, you could get guys out at first. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why they often shift somebody to over here on the right-hand side, because if the ball is hit to them on the ground, there's still enough time to get the person out at first. If you had the mirror image on the left-hand side, not going to happen. I don't think there would be quite enough time to get the guy out at first. I'm not sure, but definitely not as likely as a ball being hit to the right-hand side. And so that's in fact one of the biggest reasons why you're putting somebody there, is to try to prevent a single like that, a hit up the middle. Okay. So there may be some other things we're thinking about. So we need to try to figure out, where do we want to put our outfielders? And so maybe we initially have here, here, and here. So when we're trying to put, how do we measure how effective these location is? So we need some kind of statistic that tells us how effective is a configuration? So what statistic do you want to look at? That's one of the big themes of this class. Whenever I give you a problem, you have to tell me what statistic do you want to measure it by. In most sports, at the end of the season, what is the only statistic you care about? Wins, right? At the end of the day, it's all about winning. Or if it's not about wins, what is it about? There's only one thing that might be more valuable than wins. Money, right? Is that, I care about making a profit. So either wins or money. So how will we measure how effective is a configuration?
One thing we can maybe look at is the amount of putouts or assists that the shifted outfielder makes. How many times the ball actually goes to him.
Okay. So again, we only have to worry about, because we're assuming that the batter's hitting profile doesn't change. So we only have to worry about plays where maybe the shifted person is coming in. I agree it's going to make it a lot easier if we assume that the center fielder and the right fielder don't shift, that they stay in their normal spot and we're just moving. So the simplest case would just be this. Is just moving the left fielder and keeping everybody else the same. That is almost surely not what you're going to do. You'll probably have the center fielder and the right fielder shift a little bit as well. But if you want a simple problem to analyze, keep the center fielder, right fielder where they were and just shift the left fielder in like that. So how are we going to determine the value of the shift? What statistic do you want to use? I know which one I would use. I know my go-to. So you've got to tell me, was it effective? So how can you tell? So one thing was talking about looking at measuring putouts and whatnot. I think that's on the right track. What's a good statistic to see how valuable something is?
Compare like batters, the batting average, on base or like some percentage or something like that with versus without the shift.
I think that's on the right track. You're looking at the batter's batting average, slugging with and without the shift, but I don't think that's quite the right thing to look at.
You can look at I don't know too much about baseball, but do they have like box plus minus sort of, or how many runs are scored per inning?
Yes, we have the run expectancy matrix.
So you can look at how many runs are expected to get each inning, and then compare that to this, and then look at all the different shifts and see which one.
Right. So one possibility is we could look at the run expectancy of what happens for a given configuration of base runners and outs with and without the shift. So what metric? So one is we could look at compare run expectancy. I'm not sure run expectancy is the right statistic. It was the first one I was thinking of. It's close, but it may not be the right statistic to look at. There's something I think related to run expectancy. It's the win probability. So I don't know, have we talked about win probabilities before in this class? I think so, because I think I showed the Blue Jays playoff game. I'm trying to remember, who were they playing the Mariners? Where the stat online was it's like over 99% chance that one of the teams was going to win. And then in an epic playoff comeback, turns out that well, that's not the same as 100%. And this is why you don't ease up in a game until the other team concedes, because things can happen. And so to me, I think the best statistic to use is win probability. What is the chance you're going to win? And this will be related to run expectancy. But the difference is certain times runs are more valuable than others. And so when you're looking at the value of the shift, it could be, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. All right, everybody knows about COVID? Yes. So you imagine you have a really bad disease, and imagine you're at a huge risk for complications if you have it. So you're designing tests for people. There are two types of errors you could have when you're testing people. You could tell somebody who's sick that they're healthy, and you could tell somebody who's healthy that they're sick. Which error is the worst one? Telling somebody who's sick that they're healthy, because then they don't get the treatment that they need. So you would much rather err by telling healthy people that they're sick. And what you do is you often have cheap tests and more expensive tests. The more expensive tests are often more accurate, but with finite resources, you can't give everybody the more expensive tests. I believe Williams College did pooled testing. Yes. So the way pooled testing often works is, imagine you have 100 people. What you can do is you can do things in a grid. And so each person is tested horizontally, each person is tested vertically. And imagine only one person is sick. Then there's going to be one horizontal and one vertical row that would come out. If two people are sick, then when you do it like this, you would actually have 4 possible people who could be sick that would have to be retested. So if you had 100 people and you did 10 horizontal tests of 10 and 10 vertical tests of 10, and you had 2 people who were infected, you might have only 4 people that you would need to give the more expensive test to. And so in a situation like this, certain types of errors are more deadly than others. So when we're trying to look at run expectancy, I like run expectancy, but to some extent, if I lose, I don't necessarily care if I lose by 1 run or if I lose by 3 runs. And so there is a situation where I might have a better chance of winning if I do the shift, but maybe bases are loaded. And so now if I do the shift and they get a hit to the left-hand side, I'm letting in 3 runs. Well, letting in 1 or 2 runs is already enough to sink me. It's the bottom of the 9th. And so looking at the run expectancy, I think it's related. I think it's highly correlated to what we want, but I think win probability is better, because we could be in a situation where I don't want to err by weighing too much some of these extra runs that are coming in, because they don't really matter. And you already see this right now in some of the shifts that go on in baseball. If it's a tie game in the bottom of the 9th, and you have runner on third with less than 2 outs, the outfielder plays as deep as they can, so that if they catch the ball, they can still get the ball to home plate before the runner gets there. If they can't throw the ball to home plate before the runner can tag up and score, it doesn't really matter if they catch the ball and make the out. So you're willing to concede a base hit in a situation like that, because if the run scores, the run scores. And so I think what we would want to do to analyze this problem is, I think you would look at the win probability statistic, and you would look and see what is the win probability for every possible hitting event for the batter, with the shift and without the shift. The next thing then is to figure out, how do the win probabilities, how do the outcomes change as a function of the shift? What data do you need? So if you want to see how effective the shift is, what kind of data would we need to get? Yeah, we would need to get data with and without shifts. So we'll just ask, a bunch of Major League Baseball teams, we'd like to have, about 1,000 at-bats right now in a bunch of configurations. You do your best. You're not going to be able to do that. So we could try to model this mathematically. Yes.
Why don't teams do that during spring training?
So one possibility is to try some things like this to get a sense of how valuable this is. They were definitely doing shifts in 2 outfield shifts in spring training. The problem is they don't have so much data. Again, I drive very rarely by myself in the car. I'm almost done with a great book on tape on Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle. And it was talking about at one point how I think when he was in the World Series with the Mets, he was only 2 for 7. It's 7 data points. If he went for 3 for 7, would that be considered good? Yeah, but we're talking about something that's within the realm of noise. And so the problem is for a lot of these things, there's just not enough data out there yet. But if teams start to shift, then as the season progresses, the seasons progress, you can start to see how effective it is. And this might have been one of the reasons why, after a few years, more and more teams started to shift as you just got more and more data about how effective it is. But for a lot of things, I think it would be extremely valuable for teams to just try things out and just, do this a bunch of times and just see how often is the batter now getting out when we shift like this. So what you want to do is you want data on effectiveness. And so here, imagine I have my outfielder. Again, and so let's say I have my outfielder over here. Oops, didn't switch. I want to try to figure out what is the probability that the outfielder makes an out or holds somebody to a single or something like that. So I might have a distribution of outcomes. And then as I move them, I can see how much of the outfield do I cover and how valuable is each part of the outfield worth. So what you can do is you can have a value of ball landing here. Maybe based on distance to nearest fielder. We'll assume that the nearest fielder is for the most part able to get there. If I want to look at how effective a batter is, a fielder is, where do you think they're more effective? Which kind of balls? You can give me a really simple answer, then you can make it a more accurate answer. So where do you think a fielder is most effective? Well, but I might be talking about my left fielder or my right fielder. For an outfielder, where should the ball be for the fielder to be most effective? Right at them. When I played tennis with my mom years ago, she said, aim for my forehand. Right? Or if you ever play T-ball as a coach, you ask the kid, okay, show me your swing. So you have some rough idea of where they might put their bat. So when you try to lob the ball, do you think they're more effective in front or behind? In front, it's much easier to run in. So you might have some kind of region that maybe looks something like this in terms of their effectiveness, almost like a contour plot. You might have a range over here where this is maybe 100%. And you might have a little bit more of a range over here where maybe this is 90%. And so you could start doing probability models like this. And we can then have some kind of effectiveness of the outfielder. And then I have 3 different outfielders, and I can look at where they are, and I can look at what fraction of the field do they cover, and then given balls landing in different places. So I actually did this as a senior thesis with a student a couple of years ago. If anybody is interested, email me and I will share their paper. We broke hitters up into maybe 6 different categories. And we broke pitchers up into maybe 4 different categories, just so we would have enough data to say, okay, you're this type of power hitter against this type of pitcher. But again, what I wanted you to get from today is something is happening right now in baseball. There's the new 2 outfielder model. And this, of course, leads to a lot of questions about how effective is it? Where should you put it? What would we need to actually do a good paper on this? Is the data available? Can it be obtained? And the greatest challenge is going to be we don't have a tremendous amount of data on how valuable it is to have fielders in given places, but we do have hitting profiles and we do have information about where the balls land. So even though we don't have thousands of iterations of the shift happening, we do know hitter profiles. And so if we assume hitters don't change, And then you can say, well, now I'll give myself maybe a 10% chance of being able to hit to the other side. And you can start to see what would you have to be able to do for this to become valuable. All right, so I will send an email for what's going to happen on Wednesday. Welcome.